In the heart of Tesla's sprawling factory, Elon Musk walked the production floor unnoticed, dressed like any other worker in a safety vest and cap. He was there to observe quietly, but when a supervisor berated him for being too slow, the situation spiraled into something no one could have predicted. The Tesla production floor buzzed with energy. Conveyor belts hummed, robotic arms moved with precision, and workers navigated the space, each focused on their tasks. Among them was Elon Musk, blending into the scene in his simple safety vest and cap, his presence unnoticed. Elon liked to do this from time to time, step away from boardrooms and investor meetings to see firsthand how his company operated on the ground. He believed in understanding the smallest details of Tesla's production, and today was no different. He moved to a workstation where battery modules were assembled, observing the efficiency of the workers. A young technician nearby adjusted a tool with practiced ease, her focus unwavering. Elon nodded subtly, impressed by her precision. But as he stepped closer to examine the process, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Hey, you!" Elon turned to see a stocky supervisor striding toward him, his face etched with irritation. "You're slowing things down," the man barked, pointing toward the assembly line. "If you're not going to work, move out of the way." The outburst caught the attention of nearby workers, who exchanged glances but said nothing. Elon raised his hand slightly, signaling peace. "Apologies," he said calmly. "Just trying to understand how things are running here." The supervisor narrowed his eyes, clearly unimpressed. "Understand? You're not here to understand, you're here to work. If you don't pick up the pace, you're out of here." Elon remained composed, nodding politely. "Of course," he said, stepping aside. Around him, the workers resumed their tasks, though a few stole curious glances at the exchange. None of them recognized the man in the vest as their company's CEO. The hum of the production line continued as Elon stepped aside, allowing the supervisor to move past him. Workers nearby exchanged glances, some curious, others clearly uneasy. The air was thick with unspoken tension, as though everyone was wondering how far the supervisor would push his aggression. Elon observed quietly, his eyes scanning the workstation. He noticed a robotic arm struggling to align a battery module, a small miscalibration that would likely delay the line. He leaned closer, narrowing his eyes to analyze the issue. "What are you doing now?" the supervisor barked, turning back to him. His tone was sharper, more dismissive. "I said stay out of the way. You're causing more problems than you're solving." A worker nearby hesitated, her hands hovering over a set of tools as she glanced nervously between Elon and the supervisor. Another worker subtly shook his head, silently urging her to stay out of it. "I think there's an issue with the alignment here," Elon said evenly, pointing toward the robotic arm. "It's misaligned by a few millimeters, probably why the modules aren't fitting properly." The supervisor rolled his eyes, crossing his arms. "Oh, now you're an expert? Let me guess, you watched a YouTube video and now you think you know how this works." Several workers froze mid-motion, their discomfort palpable. One of them, an older technician with grease-stained gloves, glanced at Elon, his brow furrowing as if he were trying to place the face. Elon remained calm, his tone steady. "I've worked on similar issues before," he said, gesturing toward the robotic arm. "If you recalibrate the gripper by—" "Enough," the supervisor interrupted, raising his voice. "I don't need a lecture from someone who doesn't even belong here. If you can't keep up, leave." The room seemed to still for a moment, the mechanical hum of the production line now the only sound. Workers exchanged uneasy looks, but no one spoke. At the far end of the line, the technician who had been watching finally stepped forward. He adjusted his gloves, his expression cautious but firm. "Wait," he said, addressing the supervisor. "If he's right about the alignment, it could save us time. Maybe we should check it." The supervisor turned sharply toward the technician, his face flushing. "Are you taking his side now?" "I'm taking the side of efficiency," the technician replied, his tone measured. "If it's a quick fix, why not at least take a look?" The room held its breath as the supervisor glared at the technician, his authority clearly being challenged. Elon stayed silent, his focus now entirely on the robotic arm. "Fine," the supervisor finally snapped, waving his hand dismissively. "But if it doesn't work, it's your fault." The technician nodded, stepping closer to the workstation. Elon joined him, his movements unhurried but precise. Together, they examined the alignment issue, and within moments, Elon pointed out the exact calibration needed. The technician adjusted the robotic arm, his hands moving deftly as he followed Elon's instructions. With a soft click, the gripper realigned, and the next battery module slid into place seamlessly. A soft murmur spread. "That did it," he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough for the surrounding workers to hear. The supervisor scowled, his jaw tightening as he looked between Elon and the technician. "Get back to work," he snapped, his tone more subdued now. Elon offered a small nod to the technician before stepping back. The workers resumed their tasks, but the atmosphere had shifted. Quiet whispers began to ripple through the line, many of them directed toward Elon. At the far end of the floor, a younger worker leaned toward his colleague. "Who is that guy?" he whispered. "No idea," the other replied, his eyes narrowing. "But he just fixed something the supervisor couldn't." Elon approached the supervisor's office, a glass-walled cubicle overlooking the factory floor. Inside, the man sat hunched over a desk, scribbling notes onto a clipboard. His jaw tightened when he saw Elon step into the doorway. "What now?" the supervisor asked, not bothering to mask his irritation. Elon stepped inside, his movements deliberate but calm. He closed the door softly behind him to block out the noise of the production floor. "I wanted to talk," Elon said, his tone even. "It seems there's some tension out there, and I'd like to understand why." The supervisor leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You really want to know?" he said, his voice sharp. "It's simple. People like you drop in, walk around, and act like you understand what's happening here. But you don't. You don't see how tight these schedules are, how much pressure we're under to meet quotas. And you showing up like you're just another guy? It doesn't help." Elon nodded slightly, absorbing the man's words. "I understand that production is demanding," he said, "but my intention wasn't to disrupt anything. I'm here to learn. To see how we can make things better." The supervisor scoffed, shaking his head. "Make things better? Look around. We're already running at full capacity. The line stretched thin as it is. People are exhausted, and you walking in like you're just another worker, it's distracting. It throws everyone off." Elon's gaze shifted to the factory floor through the glass. Workers moved efficiently, but their faces carried signs of fatigue, tight expressions, hurried movements, and brief glances at the clock. He hadn't noticed it fully before, but now it was clear. "You're saying the team's overworked?" Elon asked, his tone thoughtful. The supervisor's voice dropped slightly, the frustration giving way to something closer to resignation. "Overworked, under pressure, and constantly told to do more with less," he admitted. "And when things don't go perfectly, guess who gets blamed? Not the people at the top. Us." The words hung in the air for a moment. Elon leaned against the desk, his focus sharpening. Why didn't anyone bring this up before? The supervisor exhaled heavily, his shoulders sagging. "Because no one thinks you'd listen. Big guys like you come in with your ideas, but you don't see the cracks in the system. You're too busy looking at the big picture." Elon stood silently for a moment, considering the man's words. He glanced back at the floor again, watching as a young worker adjusted a piece of equipment with a faint grimace of exhaustion. "What if I proved you wrong?" Elon said finally, his voice calm but firm. The supervisor blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "What if I listened?" Elon replied, standing upright. "What if I worked alongside the team for the day, took notes, and made real changes based on what I see?" The supervisor narrowed his eyes. "You're serious?" "Completely," Elon said. but I don't want special treatment. I want you to treat me like any other worker. No shortcuts, no exceptions. The supervisor studied him for a long moment, the skepticism in his eyes gradually softening. Fine, he said at last. But don't expect me to go easy on you. I wouldn't want you to, Elon said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. As Elon left the office, the supervisor's words echoed in his mind. He had come to the factory floor to observe, but now it was clear there was more to uncover, issues that required not just observation but action. Workers glanced up as Elon returned to the line, curiosity flickering in their eyes. He rolled up his sleeves, preparing to join them, determined to prove that he wasn't just watching from above, he was ready to stand beside them. The factory buzzed with the steady rhythm of production, but the atmosphere had shifted. Workers stole glances as Elon Musk walked back to the assembly line, his sleeves rolled up and his expression focused. The earlier tension from the confrontation had dissipated, replaced by an undercurrent of curiosity. Elon approached a young technician adjusting a battery module. "Can I give you a hand?" he asked, his tone casual. The technician blinked, unsure how to respond. Sure," she said, stepping aside slightly. "You'll need gloves and these tools." She handed him a pair of gloves and a torque wrench, her movements hesitant. Elon slipped on the gloves and took the wrench, positioning himself beside her. "What's the next step?" he asked. The technician pointed to the module. "You need to tighten these bolts to spec. Not too tight, or it throws off the alignment." He nodded and got to work, carefully following her instructions. The surrounding workers paused momentarily, whispering among themselves as they watched their CEO working alongside them. "Is he serious?" one murmured. "I guess so," another replied. "He doesn't look like he's just pretending." For the next hour, Elon remained on the line, tightening bolts, assembling parts, and occasionally asking questions about the process. His movements were deliberate but slower than the seasoned workers, and it didn't take long for the supervisor to step in. "You're too slow," the supervisor said, his tone sharp but less hostile than before. Elon looked up, nodding slightly. "I'm learning," he replied. "But I see how much speed matters here." "Speed isn't everything," the young technician chimed in, surprising herself as she spoke up. "If something's off, we have to fix it later anyway. Sometimes we're rushing so much that we make mistakes." The supervisor frowned, his gaze shifting between the technician and Elon. "Mistakes happen because people aren't focused," he said. "Or because they're exhausted," Elon added quietly. His words hung in the air, drawing a few subtle nods from the workers nearby. The supervisor didn't respond immediately, his expression conflicted. Before he could say more, Elon handed the torque wrench back to the technician. "Thanks for showing me the ropes," he said, offering her a small smile. She nodded, her demeanor softening. "You're not bad at this," she said, almost reluctantly. Elon chuckled lightly. "I'll take that as a compliment." As he moved along the line, he continued to observe and assist where he could, taking mental notes of the challenges the workers faced. Equipment that needed frequent adjustments, the tight schedules, and the visible fatigue on some faces, all of it painted a clearer picture of the realities on the ground. During a break, he sat down at a metal bench in the corner of the factory. A few workers hesitated before joining him, sitting at a respectful distance. One of them, a middle-aged man with grease-streaked hands, finally spoke. "You're really trying to understand, aren't you?" he asked. Elon looked up, meeting his gaze. "I am," he said simply. The man nodded. "Then you should know, it's not just about the hours. It's about feeling like what we do here matters. Sometimes it feels like we're just cogs in a machine." Elon considered his words carefully. "What would make it feel different?" he asked. The man shrugged. "Maybe if we knew the higher-ups actually cared about what we deal with. That they see us as more than just numbers." Elon nodded, the man's words resonating deeply. He glanced around at the workers who had gathered nearby, each of them watching him with a mixture of skepticism and hope. As the break ended and the workers returned to their stations, Elon remained seated for a moment, deep in thought. It was clear that changes were needed, changes that wouldn't just improve productivity but also show the workers they were valued. He stood, brushing off his gloves, and headed toward the supervisor. "I want to meet with the team after the shift ends," he said. The supervisor raised an eyebrow. "The whole team?" "Yes," Elon replied. "I want to hear what they have to say." The supervisor hesitated before nodding. "All right. But don't expect it to be easy." "I wouldn't want it to be," Elon said, walking back to the line. The rest of the shift passed quickly, but the air in the factory felt different. The workers, though still focused on their tasks, seemed lighter, as if Elon's presence and willingness to work alongside them had already begun to shift their perspective. As the final bell signaled the end of the shift, Elon prepared to face the team, ready to listen to their frustrations, their ideas, and their hopes for a better work environment. The workers gathered in the break room at the end of their shift, their movements hesitant but curious. The space, usually filled with the hum of lighthearted chatter or silence from exhaustion, felt charged with anticipation. Elon Musk stood at the front, dressed like any other employee, his sleeves still rolled up from the day's work. The supervisor leaned against the wall near the door, arms crossed, his expression skeptical but quieter than before. The workers filled the rows of chairs and stood along the walls, some whispering to each other as they waited for Elon to speak. "I asked all of you here because I want to listen," Elon began, his voice calm but firm. "Today, I saw what you experience every day. I worked alongside you, but it's clear there's more I need to understand. I want to know what's working and what isn't." The room remained quiet at first, the workers exchanging unsure glances. A young woman in the front row raised her hand tentatively. "It's the pace," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We're always rushing, and when something goes wrong, it's on us to fix it. But sometimes we don't have the tools or the time." Elon nodded thoughtfully. "What kind of tools do you need?" he asked. She hesitated before responding. "Better calibration equipment. The old ones keep slipping, and it slows everything down." A man in the back spoke up, his tone more confident. "It's not just the equipment. It's the hours. We're pushed hard, and by the end of the week, most of us are burnt out." Several workers murmured in agreement, their voices blending into a wave of shared frustration. Elon glanced around the room, meeting their eyes one by one. "Has anyone brought this up before?" he asked. "They don't listen," someone muttered from the side. The supervisor, still leaning against the wall, shifted uncomfortably. "It's not that simple," he interjected. "We have quotas to meet, and if we don't, the pressure comes down on us too." Elon turned to face him, his expression neutral. "I understand that. But if the team is burning out and making mistakes because of the pressure, those quotas won't mean much, will they?" The supervisor looked away, his jaw tightening. A middle-aged man near the center of the room spoke next, his voice steady. "What we need is support. When something breaks, it feels like it's always our fault, even if we've been saying for months that something needs fixing." Elon nodded again, jotting notes on a small pad he'd pulled from his pocket. "What else?" he asked. The floodgates opened. Workers began voicing their concerns about equipment, schedules, the lack of communication from management, and the feeling that they were invisible to the higher-ups. As the conversation grew, the energy in the room shifted. The workers weren't just venting, they were engaging, offering ideas and solutions. "We need regular check-ins," one said. "If someone from management came down here more often, they'd see what's going on." "And training," another added. "New people come in, but they're not trained properly, so it slows us all down." Elon listened intently, nodding occasionally and asking clarifying questions. He wrote everything down, his demeanor serious but approachable. After nearly an hour, the conversation began to wind down. The workers, though still cautious, seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Elon looked around the room, his gaze steady. "I've heard a lot tonight, and I appreciate every one of you speaking up," he said. This isn't just a one-time thing. I'll be back, and we'll start addressing these issues together. But I want you to know that what you do here matters. Tesla doesn't exist without the work you do every day." The room was silent for a moment before a quiet ripple of applause began. It grew steadily, not loud but genuine, as the workers showed their appreciation for being heard. The supervisor stepped forward, his expression conflicted. "I didn't think you'd actually listen," he admitted. Elon extended a hand. "It's my job to listen," he said. The supervisor hesitated, then shook Elon's hand firmly. "All right," he said. "Let's see what happens next." As the workers filed out of the room, many of them paused to offer nods or quiet words of thanks. Elon stood by the door, acknowledging each of them with a small smile or a word of encouragement. When the room was empty, he glanced back at the notes he'd taken. It was clear there was much to do, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The factory wasn't just a place where cars were made, it was a community, and he knew it was time to treat it as such. As he stepped back onto the quiet factory floor, Elon's mind raced with ideas for change. He had come to observe, but he was leaving with a mission, to make Tesla not just a company of innovation, but a place where every worker felt seen, valued, and heard. The story ends with Elon walking through the now silent factory, the earlier noise replaced by determination. He had seen the challenges firsthand and listened to the voices of the people who made Tesla run. It wasn't just about building cars anymore, it was about building trust, one step at a time.